Have you ever looked at your life, your relationships, your patterns, your deepest fears and thought, why does this keep happening to me? Why do you sabotage the very things you say you want? Why do you chase validation but feel emptier each time you catch it? Why does love feel like a battlefield and rest like guilt? You're not broken, but something in you is still bleeding. We all carry chains no one else can see, not made of steel, but of silence, of childhood memories too painful to revisit, of words we never heard when we needed them most, of emotional absences that carved holes so deep we began filling them with approval, ambition, or people who mirrored our wounds. You think you're angry at your partner, you think you're afraid of failure, you think your problem is discipline, confidence, time. But beneath it all, beneath every reaction, every addiction, every mask is a child who was once left unseen, unheard, unloved in the way they needed. And that child is still in you, waiting, not for another achievement, not for a partner, not for external peace, but for you, for your attention, for your acknowledgement, for your presence. Because the truth is, you will never be free, not truly, until you confront the part of you that still believes love must be earned, until you stop performing and start listening, until you stop running and finally turn inward. This isn't self-help, it's self-confrontation. It's the kind of truth that burns going down but clears everything in its wake. The wound isn't your fault, but healing it? That's your responsibility. Because the past doesn't stay in the past. It echoes in every decision you make, in the way you love, in the way you hide, in the way you punish yourself for simply being human. So ask yourself, what if the thing holding you back isn't your job, your body, your partner, or your timing? What if it's a memory, a story, a moment your nervous system never forgot, even when your mind did? That's what this journey is about, not fixing you, but freeing you. And it begins by turning toward the shadow you've spent a lifetime avoiding. Carl Jung once said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate." And maybe that's what you've been doing all along, mistaking your patterns for destiny, your defenses for personality, your triggers for truth. But the truth is simpler and harder all at once. You've buried parts of yourself so deeply, you forgot they were even there. This is the shadow, not evil, not monstrous, but made of everything you were told you shouldn't be, everything you were punished for expressing, everything that made you too much or not enough in the eyes of people you once believed were gods. The shadow is the anger you swallowed as a child because being angry meant being rejected. It's the tears you held back because crying made you weak. It's the joy you dimmed because someone said, "Don't be so loud." It's the shame you inherited without ever realizing it wasn't yours to carry. And slowly, piece by piece, you buried those parts under smiles and roles. You became who you thought you had to be safe, loved, accepted. But what's buried doesn't die. It waits. It waits in your reactions, in your inability to trust, in your need to control, in your fear of vulnerability. The shadow doesn't whisper, it screams, but it does so through sabotage, projection, and pain. That's why you end up in the same arguments with different people. That's why success feels hollow. That's why love feels dangerous. Not because you're cursed, but because your shadow is still steering the wheel unconsciously, invisibly. And until you turn around and look it in the eyes, it will keep doing so, quietly dictating your life behind the scenes. But here's the paradox. The parts you buried aren't your shame, they're your power, your sensitivity, your creativity, your depth, your boundaries. The traits that once felt dangerous to express are the very ones that will set you free. To confront the shadow is not to destroy it, it's to integrate it, to welcome home the pieces of you exiled long ago. Because true freedom isn't found in perfection, it's found in wholeness. And wholeness begins where you stopped looking inside the wound. Before you learned how to speak, before you had words for what you felt you had needs, to be held, to be seen, to be accepted, not for what you did, but for simply existing. And when those needs went unmet repeatedly, silently or violently, something inside you cracked. This is the childhood wound, and it wears many names: neglect, rejection, abandonment, betrayal, shaming, control. But more than what happened on the outside, the wound lives in what you came to believe about yourself because of it. You weren't just ignored, you believed you weren't worth noticing. You weren't just left, you believed you were unlovable. You weren't just criticized, you believed there was something wrong with you. That's how the wound forms, not from the event itself, but from the meaning your nervous system and subconscious mind wrapped around it. And that meaning becomes a blueprint, a lens through which you start to view everything. You learn to survive by shrinking, by pleasing, by outperforming, by disappearing. And while your body kept growing, part of you emotionally stayed stuck at the age where love first felt unsafe. No one talks about this in school. No one tells you that your adult anxiety might be rooted in emotional abandonment, that your trust issues aren't about the present, they're echoes from a time when safety meant silence and expression meant punishment. But here's what no one tells you until it's almost too late. You cannot outrun a wound by pretending it doesn't exist, because it always finds a way to speak through relationships, habits, fears, even illnesses. The childhood wound is not a chapter you can skip. It's the one you must read slowly, painfully, and completely if you ever want to write a different ending. And until you do, it will continue to bleed into your present, disguised as logic, disguised as preference, disguised as fate. But it's not fate. It's a child inside you, still waiting to be rescued, not by someone else, but by you. You didn't become who you are by accident. You became who you had to be. When love felt conditional, when safety came with strings, you learned quickly, if I'm perfect, maybe I'll be enough. Or, if I cause trouble, at least they won't ignore me. Or, if I make everyone happy, maybe they'll finally see me. And so, you adapted, you performed, you built a mask. That mask may look like the achiever-driven, tireless, always chasing the next goal. Or the pleaser kind, selfless, unable to say no. Or the rebel-defiant, wild, allergic to authority. Or even the ghost quiet, invisible, afraid to take up space. But make no mistake, one of those are the real you. They're not your essence, they're your armor. Carl Jung called it the personality version of ourselves we present to the world to be accepted, to belong. It's the face we wear when the truth feels too dangerous to reveal, and it works for a while. It gets us praise, safety, approval, but it comes at a cost. The more we feed the persona, the further we drift from the self. The mask becomes a prison. You start to wonder why no one sees you until you realize you've never actually shown them who you are. And here's the most painful truth. Many of us don't even know who that is anymore. We've worn the mask for so long, we've mistaken it for our face. But under every overachiever is a child terrified of not being enough. Under every rebel is a heart desperate to be loved for who they are. Under every pleaser is someone who has no idea what they want, because all they've ever done is adapt to others. The mask was necessary. It kept you safe, but safety isn't the same as freedom. To heal, you must dare to remove it. Not all at once, not with everyone, but slowly, bravely, in moments where the cost of hiding finally outweighs the fear of being seen. Because real connection only happens when the mask comes off. And the self you've buried beneath the persona? That's where your freedom lives. You think you've moved on. After all, you're functioning, you're busy, you've built a life, maybe even a successful one. But somewhere, deep in your nervous system, something still flinches. Something still braces for impact. Because even if you've grown up, your wound hasn't. It's there in the way you self-sabotage right before things start to go well, the way you suddenly ghost someone who gets too close, the way you convince yourself you're not ready when what you really mean is, I don't believe I'm worthy of it. It's in your overachievement, that endless chase for the next accomplishment, the next goal, the next gold star that might finally prove to someone, maybe your parent, maybe yourself, that you're enough. It's in your fear of abandonment, how a delayed text can unravel your sense of security, how being alone feels like a punishment rather than peace. You don't trust love to stay, so you hold it tightly or you run before it can run first. It's in your imposter syndrome, that relentless voice whispering, they'll find out you're a fraud, because somewhere inside, you still believe you have to earn your right to exist. It's in your chronic people-pleasing, how yes rolls off your tongue, even when your body screams no, because disappointing others still feels more dangerous than betraying yourself. And maybe the most haunting sign of all, you confuse being needed with being loved, so you keep giving until there's nothing left of you but obligation and quiet resentment. So ask yourself, honesty, are you really reacting to the present, or are you defending a child who still doesn't feel safe, who still believes love is conditional, who still thinks they have to prove, perform, protect? Because if you're tired of the cycles, the pretending, the hollow victories, it's not because you're weak, it's because you've been at war with yourself for too long. You're not broken, but part of you is still bleeding. And if that part doesn't heal, it will keep choosing people, careers, and situations that match the pain, not because you want to suffer, but because it's familiar. And what's familiar feels safe even when it hurts. If intelligence were the answer, you'd be free by now. You've read the books, listened to the podcasts, made the lists, set the goals. You've rationalized your pain, analyzed your triggers, made sense of every wound down to its psychological blueprint. And still you wake up feeling empty, anxious, lost. Why? Because the wound doesn't live in your mind. It lives in your body. It's not a logic problem, it's a nervous system imprint, a memory your body keeps reliving even when your mind says, that was years ago. You were wired to survive, not to thrive. So you adapted. You learned how to disconnect intellectually, emotionally, even physically. You built walls, you told yourself stories, you moved on, but you never really moved through. Because trauma, especially emotional trauma, is not just what happened. It's what happened inside you as a result. And your body remembers. The tightening in your chest when someone raises their voice. The paralysis in your gut when you're asked to be vulnerable. The urge to overachieve, to apologize, to disappear. These aren't flaws, they're protective patterns. But the longer you ignore them, the more they control you. You can't journal your way out of a fight or flight response. You can't meditate your way out of a dysregulated nervous system. You can't checklist your way into wholeness. Because what you're trying to heal isn't just a thought, it's a felt sense. And it needs something more than analysis. It needs presence, slowness, safety. A felt experience of, I'm here, I'm okay, I'm not alone anymore. Real healing happens when you bring the body back into the room, when you stop intellectualizing your pain and start feeling it fully without judgment, without bypassing, without trying to solve it like a puzzle. This isn't about fixing, it's about feeling, not to drown in it, but to finally release it. Because you can't liberate yourself from something you only understand in theory. You have to feel it in your bones. You have to let the body tell its story so it can finally stop screaming in silence. There's a war happening inside you. Quiet, constant, exhausting. And most days, you don't even realize it's happening. On one side is the inner child, the part of you still aching for safety, for affection, for unconditional love. This part doesn't speak in logic, it speaks in longing. It doesn't use words, it uses reactions. Panic, silence, overwhelm. The child inside you still believes they are the problem. And on the other side? The inner critic, cold, sharp, relentless. It's the voice you hear when you mess up. You're such an idiot. When someone pulls away, of course they left. You're too much. When you try to rest, you haven't earned it. This critic isn't yours. It was given to you. Maybe from a parent who withheld love unless you performed. A teacher who only saw your failures. A culture that taught you you're only as good as your productivity, your body, your silence. Over time, you internalized it, not just as a belief but as your default operating system. Now, it runs your mind. It corrects you before you speak. It shames you before you feel. It makes self-compassion feel like laziness. It makes softness feel like weakness. Meanwhile, your inner child is just trying to breathe. She wants to be held, not fixed. He wants to be heard, not managed. They want to be loved, not silenced. But how can they speak when the critic has a megaphone? The truth is, most of your anxiety isn't from the world outside, it's from this war within. The never-ending battle between the part of you that wants to be seen and the part of you that says you don't deserve to be. And here's what changes everything. The moment you realize you are not the critic. You are the one listening, and you get to choose which voice to turn up. Healing begins when you become the parent you needed. When you defend the child instead of scolding them. When you replace cruelty with care. Because the child isn't the problem. The problem is the voice telling them they are. What if I told you that most of what triggers you isn't about the other person at all? Carl Jung called it projection. When we disown parts of ourselves, we start seeing them everywhere else. What we cannot accept inside, we cast outside, not consciously, automatically, instinctively. Like a defense mechanism dressed up as truth. So the person who's too emotional, maybe they mirror your own sensitivity, the one you buried because it once got you hurt. The person who's too confident, maybe they embody a boldness you never felt safe enough to claim. The partner who doesn't text back fast enough, maybe they're touching the exact nerve of that childhood abandonment you never acknowledged. We don't see people as they are. We see them through the lens of our own pain. Romantic relationships are the perfect mirror for this. You think you're just upset they didn't call, but what you're really feeling is the echo of a moment when someone important didn't show up. You think you're angry they're pulling away, but what's flaring up is the abandonment wound that's still raw beneath your polished exterior. And in the workplace? You resent the boss who micromanages, but maybe it reminds you of a parent who never trusted you. You envy the colleague who speaks up effortlessly, but maybe it's not them you're angry at, it's the version of you that learned to stay small. This isn't about blame, it's about awareness. Because until you name the projection, you'll keep reenacting the past, calling it your present. You'll keep arguing with your partner about now while your inner child is still fighting to be heard from then. Projection is how the shadow survives. It avoids the mirror and finds a screen instead. It keeps you angry, confused, hurt and convinced the problem is always out there. But once you see it taunts, you realize you're not just reacting to them, you're responding to you. Everything shifts. The trigger becomes a teacher, the relationship becomes a mirror, and the wound becomes a doorway. Not to exile, but to integration. Because you can't heal what you keep blaming. And you can't find freedom until you stop projecting your prison onto everyone else. There is a moment, a quiet, earth-shaking moment when you stop running. Not because you're out of breath, but because you finally realize the pain you've been avoiding is the key to your freedom. This is the turning point. The place where healing begins not with solutions, but with acknowledgement. With the courage to finally ask, what did I really need that I never got? Not what you were told you needed, not what made your caregivers comfortable, but what your soul ached for in the dark when no one was looking. Maybe you needed to be held instead of told to toughen up. Maybe you needed protection instead of being asked to keep family secrets. Maybe you needed to be heard, not fixed, to be celebrated, not compared. Maybe you just needed someone to say, it's not your fault. And when that didn't happen, you didn't just feel pain. You formed beliefs. I'm too much. I'm not enough. I have to earn love. And you've lived through those beliefs like they were facts. You've shaped your career, your relationships, your self-worth around lies you never chose but learned to survive. But now you're here, and survival is no longer enough. You want peace, wholeness, a life that doesn't hurt quietly underneath the surface. But you can't heal what you won't face. You can't forgive what you've never named. And you can't reclaim yourself if you're still pretending it didn't matter. Radical honesty is the gatekeeper to real freedom. It's not about blame, it's about truth. Because the wound wasn't your fault, but healing it, that's yours now. So ask yourself, gently but bravely, what did I truly need as a child that I convinced myself I could live without? And when you answer, let that be the beginning, because it's not the pain that destroys us, it's the silence. Carl Jung wrote, there is no coming to consciousness without pain. And this is what most people never tell you about healing. Before it frees you, it breaks you. Not to destroy you, but to dismantle the illusion that you ever had to be anything less than whole. This is the descent, the sacred, terrifying journey inward, the plunge into your own darkness. Not to drown, but to find what you left behind. This is what Jung called individuation, becoming your truest self by reclaiming the parts you buried in the shadows. And here's the truth. You cannot integrate what you're unwilling to face. You cannot embody light until you've sat with your darkness. So you go back not to relive it, but to release it. You revisit the bedroom where your tears were ignored, The dinner table where silence screamed louder than words. The memory where love came with conditions so sharp they cut your sense of self. You feel the ache. You let it rise. You don't analyze it this time, you let it move through you. Because these memories didn't just live in your mind, they stored themselves in your body. And now, to be free, you must invite them out of hiding, not with force, but with compassion. Yes, it hurts. Yes, it's uncomfortable. But it's not as dangerous as the life you'll keep repeating if you don't go back. This is why healing is not linear, it spirals, it circles back. Not because you're broken, but because you're finally strong enough to return to the places you once had to abandon. This descent is sacred. Because what you meet in the depths is not just your pain, it's your power. The self you silenced to survive. The truth you swallowed to stay safe. And when you bring that part home, something shifts. You stop running. You stop pretending. You begin true for the first time. Because only in the dark do we find what was lost. And only through descent do we rise whole. You can't go back and change what happened. You can't make them love you the way you needed. You can't rewrite the childhood that shaped you. But you can become the person you needed back then. This is the heart of healing. Reparenting, the quiet, revolutionary act of meeting your own unmet needs with compassion instead of criticism. It's not a concept, it's a commitment. To soothe instead of shame. To listen instead of silence. To protect instead of abandon. Because the child in you is still alive. Not in a metaphorical way, in a very real nervous system kind of way. Every time you're triggered, overwhelmed, or frozen in fear, that child is whispering, "Please don't leave me again." And now, as an adult, you finally have what you didn't back then, choice. You get to choose not to betray yourself this time. You get to choose to show up. So how do you reparent? You pause when you want to push through. You breathe when you want to numb. You place a hand on your heart and say, "I see you. You're safe now." You learn to ask, not avoid. What do I need right now? What would comfort feel like in this moment? What would I say to a child feeling what I'm feeling? You feed yourself not just with food, but with rest, boundaries, truth. You stop using productivity to earn your worth. You stop chasing love that makes you feel like a burden. You become your own safe space, your own nurturer, your own guide. Because healing doesn't mean pretending the pain never happened. It means creating the love you never received and offering it generously to yourself. You may not have had the parent you needed, but you can become the adult you deserve. And that is how cycles break. Healing isn't forgetting. It's remembering without reliving. It's holding your past not as a curse, but as context. It's knowing that the wound is real and so is your ability to carry it differently now. This is integration. Not erasing the scar, not pretending the pain is gone, but stitching it into your story so that it no longer defines you, it refines you. Because at some point, the healing journey shifts. It stops being about fixing the broken parts and starts being about honoring them. It's where your shame becomes strength, where your silence becomes sovereignty, where your story becomes your ceremony. You stop asking, "Why did this happen to me?" And you begin to ask, "What will I do with this truth now that I've faced it?" You no longer need to fight the memory or numb it or shrink it. You can let it rest. You can let it live as a shadow over your present, but as a part of the path that brought you here. Carl Jung said, "One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious." You've done that. You've walked through it. And now you carry your scars not as shame, but as symbols of transformation. Because the scar says, "I lived through this." But your present says, "I refuse to let it define me." Integration is not an ending. It's an arrival. The moment you stop trying to become someone else and start remembering who you were before the world told you otherwise, you will still have bad days. You will still be triggered. But now you have tools. Now you have awareness. Now you have yourself. And that is what wholeness feels like. Not perfection, but presence. Not absence of pain, but the power to hold it with grace. There comes a moment when something inside you quietly, but irrevocably, shifts. You're no longer waiting for someone to choose you. You're no longer bending yourself into versions that fit someone else's comfort. You stop begging for attention, for love, for permission to take up space. This is emotional sovereignty, sacred ground where your worth no longer depends on someone else's validation. It's the first breath after the storm. The moment you realize, I am mine, you stop outsourcing your value to people who couldn't hold your truth. You stop performing for love you never had to earn in the first place. You stop confusing emotional intensity with connection, chaos with chemistry, guilt with care. It doesn't mean you don't feel. You feel everything. But you don't drown in it anymore. You don't react from the wound, you respond from awareness. You observe your triggers instead of becoming them. You witness your stories instead of living inside them. You love, but not to fill a void. You give, but not to be needed. You stay, but only where you feel seen. And here's the most radical thing of all. You no longer fear being alone, because now your own presence is enough. Now, you trust yourself. That doesn't mean you're hardened, it means you're whole. You don't shrink for safety. You don't lose yourself to keep someone else. You stop asking, do they love me? And start asking, does this love feel safe, reciprocal, true? Because when you become emotionally sovereign, you don't guard your heart out of fear, you protect your peace out of reverence. You no longer need to be chosen to feel complete, because you've already chosen yourself. Carl Jung called it individuation, the process of becoming whole, not by becoming someone else, but by becoming fully, unapologetically yourself. Not the self you were told to be, not the self you performed to survive, but the self that has always been there, beneath the masks and wounds and adaptations. And after all this work, after revisiting the pain, reparenting the child, facing the shadow, integrating the past, you finally feel it. You are no longer a fragmented self. You are a unified being. You no longer live as pieces in conflict. You no longer have to choose between the part of you that needs and the part that protects, the part that longs and the part that fears. They all have a place now. They all belong, because they're all you. This isn't about reaching enlightenment. It's not about becoming perfect. It's about becoming real. You reclaim your voice. You speak not to impress, but to express. You move through life not seeking to be fixed, but choosing to evolve. You no longer wear the mask. You no longer armor up in every room you walk into. You know who you are. And more importantly, you like who you are. That's the quiet power of individuation. When your inside and your outside begin to match. When you stop splitting yourself to survive. When you realize, this is me, and I am enough. There's a steadiness in your walk now. A softness in your boundaries. A calmness in your presence. Because individuation isn't a destination, it's a deep returning to your truth, to your essence, to your wholeness. And after a lifetime of pretending, adjusting, and performing, that is the most sacred homecoming of all. There comes a moment when the pain becomes a doorway, not a wall, not a sentence, but a sacred threshold. And on the other side, freedom. Not the kind that looks like escape, but the kind that feels like return. Return to truth. Return to self. Return to everything you were before the world taught you to forget. Because the path to liberation doesn't go around your pain. It goes through it. Through the night you cried quietly so no one would hear. Through the years you kept smiling just to be safe. Through the masks you wore, the silence you swallowed, the needs you buried just to belong. You thought healing would make you lighter. Sometimes it does. But first, it makes you honest. It makes you face what you thought would destroy you, only to discover you are still here. Breathing, standing, becoming. Your childhood wound is not your shame. It's not your burden. And it is not your identity. It's your initiation. The moment everything cracked wasn't the end of you. It was the beginning of your return. A breaking open, not a breaking down. A summons not to stay wounded, but to rise conscious. To meet yourself, fully, fiercely, finally. You will still be triggered. But now, you'll know how to respond. You will still grieve. But now, you'll know how to hold yourself in that grief. You will still long for love. But now, you'll remember you are already worthy of it. And when you look back, you'll no longer ask, why did this happen to me? You'll ask, what did this awaken in me? So now I ask you, gently but clearly, are you ready? Are you ready to stop running? To stop hiding beneath productivity and perfection? To stop waiting for someone else to save you? Are you ready to meet the parts of you once left behind and bring them home? Because that's where your liberation begins. Not in someone else's arms, not in someday, somewhere, but right here, right now, in you. And this time, you don't have to run. This time, you get to return. This story was intense, but this story on the right-hand side is even more insane.